Hi, I'm John Matthew Fox of Bookfox, and these common misconceptions about plot can really ruin your book if you don't catch them early in the process. For this video, we're going to look at 8 brutal truths about plot, and we're going to start with the ones that are easiest to fix, and then move towards the ones that are harder to fix. And the first point we need to look at is plot isn't what just happens. Sometimes I'll edit a book and it will have a whole bunch of events lined up chronologically, sort of like ducks in a row. And I have to tell them, yes, this is a series of chronological events, but there's a big difference between that and a story. To make it a story, you need to connect these events thematically. To make this a story, you need to show characters learning and growing. To make this a story, you need to create anticipation for the next part of the story. And to make this a story, you need to create reversals and surprises. Don't get sucked into this common misconception that a series of events constitutes a story. There's a big difference. The second truth that you absolutely need to know is that character and plot are inseparable. The best plots arise from character decisions, not external events exerting pressure on a story. And really, some writers are surprised when they find out that you can plot an entire novel solely through character decisions. And I'll make 2 quick points about this. First, a character's personality determines how they're going to respond to plot events. For an example of this, let's look at The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. Because of his beliefs about what a butler should be, very aloof and dignified and not speaking up about his own personal beliefs, his only goal is to provide service for his family, that affects the plot in 2 huge ways. It prevents him from acknowledging his feelings for Miss Kenton, and it also prevents him from truly acknowledging that his employer has sympathies with Nazis. I mean, just imagine if this butler had the personality of Brad Pitt's character in Inglourious Basterds. We would have a Nazi killing story instead of the very quiet domestic story that Kazuo Ishiguro wrote. And the second point I want to make is that the very best stories feature plots that test your main character's values and flaws. For an example of this, look at Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. In this post-apocalyptic world, they have this belief that art still matters, that they're going to continue performing Shakespeare. But when their very survival is at stake, it really challenges those beliefs about preserving civilization. So, little pro tip here, if you are stuck with your plot, pivot to character. Look at that character's decision. Make them make choices, and it'll probably help you get out of that little rut. Some of you might disagree with this next point, and I'm okay with that. Let's have a discussion about it. It is number 3. Structure shouldn't be formulaic. So the way I view structure is more of like a tool to manage tension and to manage readers' engagement with your story. So I'm going to present 2 choices for authors when they're dealing with structural models for their stories. The first choice is they choose one structure and they use that for all their books. Something like, Save the Cat, which is very dogmatic about what's going to happen on page 52 and what's got to happen on page 96. The limitations on a structure like that, though, is that it might not be right for your story in certain places in the book. It's just simply too prescriptive. So I really prefer this second model of how to deal with structuring your book. My recommendation is to look at 5 or 10 models and take from them what you need for your particular story. If a particular story beat doesn't work, that's fine, throw it out, right? And use something from a different model. There are so many story structure patterns out there, just don't get locked into a single one. Float between various options, draw from various options for every single novel that you write. The fourth hard truth is one that a lot of writers don't want to admit to themselves, but they know instinctually that it is true. It is number 4. The middle is where most stories collapse. So you have to do a lot of work to plan for this middle section of your novel, so it doesn't collapse on you like it does for so many other writers. And 3 quick points on this topic. I think you really need to divide your middle up into manageable chunks so you don't get overwhelmed by this huge block of storyline. A good way to divide it into chunks is to have a series of escalating obstacles and then overcoming those obstacles, sort of like a set of stairs. The second thing you want to do in the middle of your novel to help it out is create some sort of midpoint reversal. This can be, say, betrayal from a friend. This could be a change of goal or the desire of the protagonist. Or in the middle, you could have some sort of twist which really changes the reader's expectations of the whole story. For instance, I think there's a great example of a reversal in Parasite, which won the Oscar in 2024 Best Picture. There is a moment when a housekeeper returns to the house and she reveals there's a whole bunker beneath this house and a whole other family is living there. It lights the storyline on fire, and really the second half of the entire story is dealing with that revelation. And then my third tip is, instead of having the middle of your story aim for the climax, which instinctually I think most writers are thinking that way, I would suggest it aiming at the moment before the climax. This is the moment which is often called, say, Dark Night of the Soul or All is Lost. It's the nadir of the story, the very lowest point for your character. And I feel like aiming at that is much more doable for the writer because it's one step before the climax. You don't have to like connect everything in this middle to the climax, but it does get them to the very low point before you get to the climax or the end of the story. And if you want more help with writing the middle of your story, take my course, Write Your Best Novel. I offer solutions like these are the guide ropes you need to take you through the middle. I talk about how to use plot boxes to help you structure the middle of your story. And I also talk about the most common dangers that you absolutely need to avoid when you're writing the middle. But let's move on to the fifth hard truth when it comes to plotting your book. Plot twists only work when properly set up. I know that sounds a little bit obvious, but hey, a lot of writers mess up on this. So you really need to pay attention and make sure that your story feels inevitable, not just surprising. So I'm going to give you two examples of plot twists. One is a great example and the other one's a terrible example. For a good example, let's look at The Sixth Sense. There are all sorts of clues that hint at what the twist might be. He only interacts with Cole through the whole movie. He is always wearing the same clothes. And his wife treats him like he's not even there. That's why rewatching the film is so rewarding, because you see all of that stuff now that you know the twist at the end. But for an example of an absolutely terrible plot twist, let's look at the movie Remember Me with Robert Pattinson. So this whole storyline is a normal romance, and then in the very last minute or so of the movie, you see a chalkboard with the date written, and it's 9/11. And he is up in the Twin Towers looking out the window, and you realize, oh, he's gonna die. Someone described this ending as being rickrolled by 9/11, which I think is such an apt description. There was a hidden date. Audiences expected this was 2010 and not 2001. The Twin Towers were never shown in the film, so you really weren't building up to it in any way. And also, this really was a romance. So it's a bit of a genre twist to say at the end, like, oh, surprise, like I'm bringing this huge historical event in the romantic story. Ultimately, this is exploiting a historical event to try to give a sense of gravitas to the story, make it seem like, oh, this is really serious. And it really didn't work on any level. I got some great examples for this next point about plot, and we're looking at number 6, plot depends on pacing contrasts. So you guys probably instinctually understand how important pacing is to your plot. You could have the best plot in the world, and yet if you don't pace it properly, it's gonna fall apart. Pacing is just the speed at which your plot unfolds. And I just wanna say that fast-paced, slow-paced isn't as important as the contrast between pacing. What I'll see less frequently as an editor is sometimes I'll see 3 chapters in a row with just non-stop action, and the reader doesn't have any space to even take a breath or reflect or pause for a moment. So what you're really looking for in a storyline is to have moments with a super high octane pace and then contrast that with a more reflective tortoise style pace. And you know what does this really well? John Wick. In the very first John Wick, he has this crazy intense shootout in this strobe light dance hall, and then a very quiet, measured conversation in the Continental. In John Wick 2, there is a crazy intense catacomb chase and fight scene, and then the pace slows down and he has a conversation with the Bowery King. And then in John Wick 3, you have a fast-paced knife fight in the Antiques Weapon Museum, and then John seeks sanctuary with Sofia in Casablanca. A lot slower pace. Also, remember that movies run on clock time pretty much all the time. While when you're writing a book, you even have more latitude to slow down the pace and have 1 second take 2 pages, and then to speed up the pace and race through a particular scene. So just remember your pacing superpowers as a novelist. You really had an infinite amount of options, much more than a film does. The 7th hard truth about plotting is that plot dictates your theme. Ideally, your story's meaning should be revealed through the plot itself, not necessarily by you explicitly saying through the character or through the omniscient narrator like, hey, this is the meaning of the story. Now, for an example of this, I'm actually gonna go to children's picture books. I don't know how many of you on this channel know this, but since 2017, I've edited more than 1,000 children's picture books, and it's been a joy. I love it. But sometimes what I would see is that, say the author wrote a really beautiful story about a kid getting picked on by the bully, and then the bully realizing that what they did was wrong. And then at the end of that book, the author would say, so don't be a bully. It's mean. Like they would say something very explicit like, just in case you missed it, like this is the point of the story. And what I would usually counsel them is, look, that sort of explicit sermonizing at the end of a story, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work for a couple different reasons. One is that you're not trusting the story itself. Story is very powerful, and there is nearly zero children out there who will read a story about a bully learning that they've done something wrong and not think, oh, like bullying's bad, I shouldn't do that. You want to be able to trust the mechanism of story to communicate the truths that you're trying to get across. It's really the reason why you're writing a novel and not a nonfiction book, right? If you just want to say it explicitly, write a nonfiction book about that topic. But no, you're writing a novel because you want to explore characters and a world, and meaning will come out of that. The theme will emerge organically from the storyline. Now, I'm not saying that you can never have a character like explicitly say the theme in dialogue, of course not. But it's usually a better idea to let the story tell the theme rather than spending, I don't know, a couple pages of someone monologuing about it. The last hard truth that we're gonna get to in this video is about endings, which seems very proper in a way. It's number 8. Endings need both resolution and resonance. What most writers think about when they're working on their ending is offering resolution for all the plots and all the subplots out there. That's great. That's great. What I'm trying to get you to do is not to forget about resonance. Resonance is really about giving the reader something thoughtful to chew on at the end of a book. And if you end with 100% plot at the end of your novel, you're gonna leave the reader unsatisfied. And a great example of this would be No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. And I'm gonna be talking about the book here, not the movie. You would think that such a action-oriented plot would end with a lot of action. But no, it actually ends in ruminating. In the end of this book, the sheriff has 2 dreams. And the dreams are really about disillusionment with justice. They are about the nature of violence, how cyclical it is and how inescapable it is. And it's really letting this old sheriff challenge us with what he's learned throughout his life and how he thinks about the world now that he's been through all these events. And this teaches us one very important thing about plot. Sometimes the best thing that you can do for your plot is just to step away from the plot twists and all the plot escalation and all the plotty plot stuff, and instead just take a moment to pause, to slow down the pacing, to have characters think, to have characters ruminate, to have characters wrestle with the very stuff that makes us human. Great plotting allows for breaks from the more plot-centric parts of your story. It allows breathers. And sometimes a great place for that breather is at the very end of your book. I hope those 8 truths help you as you are plotting your novel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy writing.